Dear students, today we will discuss about composting. Composting is the natural process of rotting or decomposition of organic matter by microorganisms under controlled conditions. Raw organic materials such as crop residues, animal wastes, food garbage, some municipal waste and suitable industrial wastes enhance their suitability for application to the soil as a fertilizing resource after having undergone composting. Compost is a rich source of organic matter. Soil organic matter plays an important role in sustaining soil fertility and hence in sustainable agricultural production. In addition to being a source of plant nutrient, it improves the physico-chemical and biological properties of the soil. As a result of these improvements of the soil, it becomes more resistant to stresses such as drought, diseases and toxicity, helps the crop in improved uptake of plant nutrients and possesses an active nutrient cycling capacity because of vigorous microbial activity. These advantages manifest themselves in reducing cropping risks, higher yields and lower outlays on inorganic fertilizers for farmers. Types of composting. Composting may be divided into two categories by the nature of the decomposition process. In anaerobic composting, decomposition occurs where oxygen is absent or in limited supply. Under this method, anaerobic microorganisms dominate and develop intermediate compounds including methane, organic acids, hydrogen sulfide and other substances. In the absence of oxygen, these compounds accumulate and are not metabolized further. Many of these compounds have strong odors and some present phytotoxicity. As anaerobic composting is a low temperature process, it leaves weed seeds and pathogens intact. Moreover, the process usually takes longer than aerobic composting. These drawbacks often offset the merits of the process, little work involved and nutrient loss during the process. Aerobic composting takes place in the presence of ample oxygen. In this process, aerobic microorganisms break down organic matter and produce carbon dioxide, ammonia, water, heat and humus, the relatively stable organic end product. Although aerobic composting may produce intermediate compounds such as organic acids, aerobic microorganisms decompose them further. The resultant compost with its relatively unstable form of organic matter has little risk of phytotoxicity. The heat generated accelerates the breakdown of proteins, fats and complex carbohydrates such as cellulose and hemicellulose. Hence, the processing time is shorter. Moreover, this process destroys many microorganisms that are human or plant pathogens as well as weed seeds, provided it undergoes sufficiently high temperature. Although more nutrients are lost from the materials by aerobic composting, it is considered more efficient and useful than aerobic composting for agricultural production. More focus has been laid on aerobic composting. The aerobic composting process. The aerobic composting process starts with the formation of the pile. In many cases, the temperature rises rapidly to 70 to 80 degrees Celsius within the first couple of days. First, mesophilic organisms, optimum growth temperature range 20 to 45 degrees Celsius, multiply rapidly on the readily available sugars and amino acids. They generate heat by their own metabolism and raise the temperature to a point where their own activities become suppressed. Then a few thermophilic fungi and several thermophilic bacteria, optimum growth temperature range that is 50 to 70 degrees Celsius or more, continue the process, raising the temperature of the material to 65 degrees Celsius or higher. This peak heating phase is important for the quality of the compost as the heat kills pathogens and weed seeds. The active composting stage is followed by a curing stage and the pile temperature decreases gradually. The start of this phase is identified when turning no longer reheats the pile. At this stage, another group of thermophilic fungi start to grow. These fungi bring about a major phase of decomposition of plant cell wall materials such as cellulose and hemicellulose. Curing of the compost provides a safety net against the risks of using immature compost such as nitrogen, hunger oxygen deficiency, and toxic effects of organic acids on plants. Factors affecting aerobic composting. Aeration. Aerobic composting requires large amounts of oxygen, particularly at the initial stage. Aeration is the source of oxygen and thus indispensable for aerobic composting. Where the supply of oxygen is not sufficient, the growth of aerobic microorganisms is limited, resulting in slower decomposition. Moreover, aeration removes excessive heat, water vapor, and other gases trapped in the pile. Heat removal is particularly important in warm climates as the risk of overheating and fire is higher. Therefore, good aeration is indispensable for efficient composting. It may be achieved by controlling the physical quality of the materials, for example, particle size and moisture content, pile size, ventilation, and by ensuring adequate frequency of turning. Moisture. Moisture is necessary to support the metabolic activity of the microorganisms. Composting materials should maintain a moisture content of 40 to 65%. Where the pile is too dry, composting occurs more slowly, while a moisture content in excess of 65% develops anaerobic conditions. In practice, it is advisable to start the pile with a moisture content of 50 to 60%, finishing at about 30%. Nutrients. Microorganisms require carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and the potassium as the primary nutrients. Of particular importance is the carbon to nitrogen ratio of raw materials. The optimal carbon to nitrogen ratio of raw materials is between 25:1 and 30:1, although ratios between 20:1 and 40:1 are also acceptable. Where the ratio is higher than 40:1, the growth of microorganisms is limited, resulting in a longer composting time. A carbon to nitrogen ratio of less than 20:1 leads to underutilization of nitrogen, and the excess may be lost to the atmosphere as ammonia or nitrous oxide, and odor can be a problem. The carbon is to nitrogen ratio of the final product should be between about 10:1 and 15:1. Temperature. The process of composting involves two temperature ranges, mesophilic and thermophilic, while the ideal temperature for the initial composting stage is 20 to 45 degrees Celsius, at subsequent stages with the thermophilic organisms taking over. A temperature range of 50 to 70 degrees Celsius may be ideal. High temperature characterizes the aerobic composting process and serves as signs of vigorous microbial activities. Pathogens are normally destroyed at 55 degrees Celsius and above, while the critical point for elimination of weed seeds is 62 degrees Celsius. Turnings and aeration can be used to regulate temperature. Lignin content. Lignin is one of the main constituents of plant cell walls, and its complex chemical structure makes it highly resistant to microbial degradation. This nature of lignin has two implications. One is that lignin reduces the bioavailability of other cell wall constituents, making the actual carbon is to nitrogen ratio lower than the one normally cited. The other is that lignin serves as a porosity enhancer, which creates favorable conditions for aerobic composting. Therefore, while the addition of lignin decomposing fungi may in some cases increase available carbon, accelerate composting, and reduce nitrogen loss, in other cases it may result in a higher actual carbon to nitrogen ratio and poor porosity, both of which prolong composting time. Polyphenols. Polyphenols include hydrolyzable and condenser tannins. Insoluble condenser tannins bind the cell walls and proteins and make them physically or chemically less accessible to decomposers. Soluble condensed and hydrolyzable tannins react with proteins and reduce their microbial degradation and thus nitrogen release. Polyphenols and lignin are attracting more attention as inhibiting factors suggest that the content of these two substances be used to classify organic materials for more efficient on-farm natural resource utilization, including compost pH value. Although the natural buffering effect of the composting process lends itself to accepting material with a wide range of pH, the pH level should not exceed 8. At higher pH levels, more ammonia gas is generated and may be lost to the atmosphere. Vermicomposting. Vermicomposting is a natural method for producing compost using earthworms. Vermicompost is the byproduct of the decomposition process in which various worm species, primarily red wigglers, white worms and other earthworms are used to produce a mixture of bedding materials, decomposing food or vegetable waste and vermicast. Vermicompost is a nutrient-rich organic fertilizer and soil conditioner that is relatively simple for plants to take since it contains water-soluble elements. Inorganic fertilizer made from worm castings is occasionally utilized. It is one of the simplest methods for turning agricultural waste into high-quality compost. Earthworms consume biomass and release the digested remnants as worm castings. Worm casts are frequently called black gold. The castings are rich in nutrients, contain compounds that encourage growth and have favorable soil microflora, all of which have the ability to limit dangerous germs. Because vermicomposting treats organic wastes more quickly than the traditional composting, it has become more popular in both industrial and home settings. Here we will discuss the objectives, types, methods, advantages and disadvantages of vermicomposting. In addition to this, we will learn about the procedure used to create vermicompost. Vermicomposting materials: animal waste, kitchen garbage, farm waste and forest litter are all examples of decomposable organic waste that are frequently utilized as composting ingredients. The main raw source are typically dried, chopped crop wastes and animal manure, primarily cow dung. A mixture of both leguminous and non-leguminous crop leftovers improves the vermicompost's quality. There are several species of earthworms including Perennix excavations, Eisenia fetida and Euripus eugenia nightcrawler. Because of its rapid production rate and ability to turn organic matter into vermicompost in about 45 days, red earthworms are recommended. Due to the fact that it is a surface feeder, vermicompost is created by the top conversion of organic resources. The origin of the raw material and the type of earthworm used determines the amount of nutrients in the compost. Beyond other nutrients, a fine worm cast is a rich source of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. Vermicompost contains nutrients that are immediately available and released 1 month after application. The amount of production and the structures used for composting determines the different types of vermicomposting. A farmer can collect 5 to 10 tons of vermicompost per year when vermicomposting is on a small scale to suit personal needs. It is carried out on a commercial scale, producing between 50 and 100 tons of organic waste per year. There are many ways to create vermicompost, but bed and pit procedures are the most popular. By constructing a bed of organic material measuring 6 by 2 by 2 feet, composting is done on the pakka or kacha floor. This approach is simple to uphold and use. Composting in pits that are 5 into 5 into 3 feet in size and made of cement is called the pit method. Thatch grass or any other native materials are used to cover the structure. This method is not favored since it produces more waste, has poor aeration and costs more to produce. A thin 5 cm layer of shattered bricks and coarse sand is laid on top of a layer of moist, loamy soil called the vermi bed, which is roughly 15 to 20 cm thick. The loamy soil is added with earthworms which will make it their home there. A compost pit measuring about 2 meters by 1 meter, preferably by 0.75 meters with a vermi bed layer between 15 and 20 cm thick can accommodate 150 earthworms. After that, a few random lumps of fresh cow manure are scattered over the vermi bed. After that, dry leaves or preferably chopped hay, straw or agricultural waste biomass are stacked into the compost pit to a depth of about 5 cm. The pit is kept wet for the following 30 days by watering it as required. The bed should neither be dry nor wet. The pit can then be covered with a jute bag to keep the birds away. Plastic sheets should not be used on the bed since they trap heat. After the first 30 days, it is covered with moist pre-digested organic waste of animal and or plant origin from the kitchen, hotel, hostel or farm with a thickness of around 5 cm. Do this twice per week in order to maintain the pits moist. Regular watering should be done. If the weather is very dry, it should be examined on a regular basis. All organic waste should be turned over or mixed frequently. A compost pit of any practical size can be built in a field, garden or backyard. It could be a single pit, 2 pits or a tank made of brick and mortar with the appropriate water outlets in any size. To counteract the ant problem, place a water column in the middle of the vermi pit's parapet wall. The 4 chambers pit will make it simple for earthworms to go continuously from one chamber that has fully composted material to the chamber that contains pre-processed trash. For breeder worms that are earthworms, feeding materials can be any type of biodegradable waste, vegetable waste, crop residues, weed biomass, dead leaf litter, agro-industry waste, urban and rural biodegradable portion of waste, and bedding materials production system, physical, mechanical. As the earthworm moves inside the substrate, it helps in the aeration of the substrate as well as it grinds the substrate. This keeps the organic waste aerated and cooling is aerated. It also saves costs required for the mechanical process units for mixing that are used in conventional composting. Biochemical. Microbial decomposition of substrate takes place in the intestines of the earthworm. Other roles, they maintain aerobic condition in the mixture and ingest solids from the substrate. A portion of the organic materials is converted to worm biomass and respiration products. The remaining partially stabilized matter is expelled as discrete material, termed as castings. Worms and aerobic mesophilic organisms act symbiotically and fasten the decomposition of the organic matter. On the basis of their feeding habits, they are classified as detrivores and geophages. Detrivores feed on plant litter or dead roots and other plant debris or on mammalian dung and on near the soil. These worms are referred to as humus formers and comprise the epigic and anisic forms. Some examples of detrivores worms are Perinix excavatus, Issenia fetida, Utrillus eugeni, Lampeto morrishi, Polypheretima elongata, Octocatona serrata and Octocatona curensis worms. Worms feed below the surface and intake greater quantities of organically rich soil. It comprises the endogic earthworms, Metapheretima posthuma and Octocatena thurstoni are 2 general examples of geophages. Epigics are surface dwellers who feed on the surface of the soil with organic matter. Endogic earthworms spend much of their time mainly in the mineral layers of the soil and burrow. For use in the vermicomposting process, the epigics and NS6 wire harnessed. Icenia fetida, the tiger of branding worm, is one of the most widely used worldwide. Lumbricus rubellus, Eutrylus eugeni, and Perennix excavatus, an Asian genus, and Icenius entry are other suitable species. Redworm species in both Icenia fetida and Lumbricus rubellus are composters, living naturally in soils that contain a lot of organic matter. The major objectives of vermicomposting are to compost organic waste to feed nutrient-hungry soils with high-quality manure, as well as to dispose of solid organic wastes. A large amount of organic waste produced by agricultural operations, dairy farms, and animal shelters that is typically discarded in corners and emit an unpleasant odor can be used by correctly composting it to create an end product with added value. Advantages of vermicomposting. The major benefits of vermicomposting are: develops roots of the plants, improves the physical structure of the soil. Vermicomposting increases the fertility and water resistance of the soil, helps in germination, plant growth and crop yield, nurtures soil with plant growth hormones such as auxins, gibberellic acid, etc. Disadvantages of vermicomposting. Following are the important disadvantages of vermicomposting. It's a time consuming process and takes as long as 6 months to convert the organic matter into usable forms. It releases a very unpleasant odor. Vermicomposting is high maintenance. The feed has to be added periodically and care should be taken that the worms are not flooded with too much to eat. The bin should not be too dry or too wet. The moisture levels need to be monitored periodically. They nurture the growth of pests and pathogens such as fruit flies, centipedes and flies. This was all for today. Hope you found this lecture interesting and informative. Thanks.